Richard Hartwell stood by the massive glass windows of his luxury apartment, looking down at the city lights below. At 52 years old, he had built an empire that most people could only dream of. His tech company was worth billions. He owned properties in different countries. He had cars that cost more than most people's houses, but none of that mattered anymore. 5 years ago, everything changed in a single moment. One rainy night, Richard was driving home with his wife Elena and their 12-year-old daughter Sophie. They were coming back from Sophie's school event. Richard remembered being tired that day. He had been working long hours at the office, barely seeing his family. Elena had practically begged him to attend Sophie's performance, and he had gone, but his mind was still on a business deal. The roads were slippery. Richard was checking his phone when he should have been watching the road. He heard Elena scream his name, but it was too late. The car hit a wet patch and spun out of control, crashing into a barrier. When Richard woke up in the hospital, he had only minor injuries. But Elena was gone, and Sophie, his little girl, was in a coma. When Sophie finally woke up 2 weeks later, the doctors gathered around Richard with somber faces. They told him that his daughter had suffered severe trauma to her head. The optic nerves were damaged. Sophie would never see again. She was blind, permanently. Richard felt like his whole world collapsed that day. He had lost his wife, the woman he loved but had taken for granted because he was always too busy working, and now his daughter, his only child, would live in darkness for the rest of her life, all because he couldn't put down his phone for one evening. The guilt ate him alive. Every single day he woke up remembering that moment. He remembered Elena's scream. He remembered the sound of the crash. He remembered seeing Sophie's small body in that hospital bed, tubes and wires everywhere, and he knew it was his fault. All of it. Richard changed completely after that. The man who used to spend 16 hours a day at the office suddenly stopped caring about business. He sold off some of his companies. He delegated his responsibilities. He turned down opportunities that would have made him even richer. None of that mattered anymore. His entire focus became Sophie. He hired the best doctors in the world, flew them in from different countries to examine her. Every single one said the same thing. The damage was permanent. There was no cure, no surgery, no miracle treatment that could bring back her vision. So Richard adapted. He converted their entire home to accommodate Sophie's blindness. He installed special flooring that she could feel under her feet. He put railings along every wall. He removed anything that could be a hazard. He hired specialists to teach her Braille, to teach her how to navigate the world without sight. But more than that, he became her constant companion. The father who used to miss birthdays and school events because of meetings was now there every single moment. He read to her for hours. He described the world outside to her in detail, trying to paint pictures with words. He held her hand and walked with her everywhere. Sophie was his entire world now. Every morning he woke up thinking about her needs. Every night he went to bed worrying if he had done enough for her. He bought her anything she wanted. The best audiobooks, the finest Braille materials, custom-made clothes that felt soft against her skin since she couldn't see them. Their home became a sort of sanctuary, but also a prison in its own way. Richard kept the curtains mostly closed because bright light bothered Sophie. He made sure every piece of furniture was in the exact same place so she would not bump into anything. He limited visitors because he didn't want people staring at his daughter or making her uncomfortable. People called Richard one of the most successful businessmen in the country. But when he looked in the mirror, all he saw was the man who destroyed his family. The money meant nothing. The success meant nothing. All that mattered was taking care of Sophie, trying to make up for the darkness he had caused in her life. 5 years had passed since the accident, and Richard's routine never changed. Wake up, check on Sophie, help her with her morning routine, spend the day with her, put her to bed, and then lie awake feeling guilty. This was his life now. This was his punishment, and in some twisted way it was also his purpose. Sophie was 17 now, no longer that little 12-year-old girl. But to Richard, she would always be his baby. The daughter he had failed, the child he was desperately trying to protect from a world she could no longer see. He had built walls around both of them, keeping them safe from the outside world, but also keeping them trapped in their shared grief and guilt. Little did Richard know that everything he believed about his daughter's condition was about to be turned upside down. The truth was living right under his roof, hiding behind dark glasses and a carefully constructed lie. And it would take an outsider, someone with fresh eyes and a caring heart, to finally see what he had been too close to notice. Maria Santos stood outside the massive iron gates of the Hartwell mansion, clutching her small suitcase and trying to calm her nerves. At 38 years old, she had worked as a housekeeper for 15 years, moving from one wealthy family to another. But this job felt different. The Hartwells were not just rich. They were incredibly rich, and Richard Hartwell was a name everyone knew. When the gates slowly opened and she walked up the long driveway, Maria couldn't help but feel small. The mansion was like something from a movie, with perfectly trimmed gardens, fountains, and tall white pillars. It was beautiful, but somehow it didn't feel warm. It felt more like a museum than a home. Mrs. Chen, the head of staff, greeted her at the door. She was a stern-looking woman in her 60s, with sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything. She gave Maria a quick once-over and nodded approvingly before leading her inside. The interior was even more impressive than the outside. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, expensive artwork on every wall. But again, something felt off. The curtains were all drawn, making the rooms dim despite it being the middle of the day. Mrs. Chen walked Maria through the house, explaining her duties in a brisk, no-nonsense manner. Clean the common areas, help with laundry, assist in the kitchen when needed, and most importantly, help care for Mr. Hartwell's daughter, Sophie. Mrs. Chen's voice softened just a bit when she mentioned the girl. Sophie is 17 years old, and she's blind, Mrs. Chen explained as they climbed the grand staircase. She lost her vision in a car accident 5 years ago, the same accident that killed her mother. Mr. Hartwell is extremely protective of her, and understandably so. You need to follow certain rules when you're around her. Maria listened carefully, nodding as Mrs. Chen listed the rules. Never move furniture or objects from their designated places. Always announce yourself when entering a room so you don't startle Sophie. Never rush her or make her feel like she's slowing anyone down. Keep your voice calm and clear. And most importantly, treat her with dignity and respect, not pity. Mr. Hartwell has dismissed staff members for making Sophie feel uncomfortable, Mrs. Chen warned. He's very particular about who works in this house, especially around his daughter. Consider yourself lucky that you got this position. We interviewed dozens of people. They stopped outside a bedroom door on the second floor. Mrs. Chen knocked softly and then opened it. Sophie, there's someone I'd like you to meet. This is Maria, our new housekeeper. She'll be helping around the house and assisting you when needed. The room was spacious but felt strangely dark, just like the rest of the house. Heavy curtains blocked most of the natural light. In the center of the room, sitting in a large armchair by the window, was Sophie. The girl wore dark glasses that completely covered her eyes. Her long brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She was thin, almost fragile-looking, and she sat completely still, her hands folded in her lap. Hello, Sophie, Maria said warmly. It's nice to meet you. Sophie turned her head in Maria's general direction but didn't smile. Hello, she replied softly. Her voice was polite but distant, as if she had said these words 1,000 times to 1,000 different people, and none of it really mattered. Over the next few days, Maria settled into her routine. She woke up early, helped prepare breakfast, cleaned the rooms, and did various tasks around the house. But she found herself most interested in Sophie and her father. The relationship between them was intense and unusual. Richard was always hovering around his daughter. He would check on her multiple times throughout the day, asking if she needed anything, if she was comfortable, if she wanted him to read to her. He spoke to her in this gentle, careful voice, as if she might break if he spoke too loudly. It was clear that he loved her deeply, but there was something suffocating about his attention. Sophie, for her part, seemed resigned to this life. She moved slowly and carefully through the house, always using her hands to feel the walls and furniture. She never went anywhere without someone accompanying her. She spent most of her time in her room or in the library, where her father would read to her for hours. Maria noticed that Sophie rarely smiled. She rarely showed any emotion at all, actually. She was like a ghost drifting through the mansion, present but not really there. It made Maria's heart ache. This was a 17-year-old girl, someone who should be thinking about college, friends, dating, and experiencing life. Instead, she was trapped in this beautiful but suffocating house, living a life that seemed to have stopped 5 years ago. The other staff members told Maria bits and pieces of the story. How Sophie used to be different before the accident, more lively and cheerful. How Richard used to be a workaholic who was never home. How everything changed after that terrible night. How Richard had transformed from an absent father to an overprotective one practically overnight. He feels guilty, Mrs. Chen told Maria one afternoon as they folded laundry. He was driving that night. He blames himself for everything. Taking care of Sophie is the only way he knows how to deal with that guilt. Maria understood guilt. She had left her own 2 children back in the Philippines with her mother so she could work abroad and send money home. Every day she carried the weight of being away from them, missing their childhoods, talking to them only through video calls. She understood doing things out of guilt and love and necessity all mixed together. But as the weeks passed, Maria began to notice something strange about Sophie. Little things that didn't quite add up. The way the girl moved sometimes seemed too confident, too precise. The way she would turn her head toward sounds with perfect accuracy. Not just the general direction, but the exact spot. The way her hands would sometimes hesitate, as if she was seeing something before touching it. Maria didn't say anything to anyone. She wasn't even sure what she was noticing, really. Maybe it was just her imagination. Maybe blind people developed other senses that were sharper. But something in her gut, some instinct developed from years of watching people in their private moments, told her to pay attention. The mansion might have looked perfect on the outside, but Maria was starting to realize that everyone inside it was hiding something. Richard was hiding from his guilt. Sophie was hiding from the world. And Maria was beginning to suspect that there was an even bigger secret hiding behind those dark glasses that Sophie never took off. Maria's 3rd week at the Hartwell mansion started like any other morning. She brought Sophie her breakfast on a tray, as was the routine. Sophie was already dressed and sitting in her usual spot by the window, wearing her ever-present dark glasses. Maria set the tray down on the side table and described what was on the plate, just as Mrs. Chen had instructed her to do. "Good morning, Sophie. I've brought your breakfast. There are scrambled eggs at the 9 o'clock position, toast with butter at 12 o'clock, and fresh fruit at 3 o'clock. Your orange juice is on the right side of the plate." "Thank you, Maria," Sophie replied in that same soft, distant voice she always used. Maria was about to leave when she accidentally bumped into a decorative vase on the dresser. It wobbled dangerously and Maria's heart jumped. She managed to catch it before it fell, but the sound of it rocking on the wooden surface was loud in the quiet room. What happened next made Maria freeze. Sophie's head turned immediately, not slowly or generally toward the sound, but sharply and precisely to the exact spot where the vase sat. Her head was angled perfectly, as if her eyes were locked onto that specific location. For someone who was supposed to be completely blind, it was an incredibly accurate response. Maria carefully set the vase down, watching Sophie from the corner of her eye. The girl seemed to realize what she had done, and quickly turned her head back to a more neutral position, her face carefully blank. Maria said nothing, but her mind was racing. That wasn't normal, was it? She had seen blind people before, and while they were sensitive to sounds, this was different. This was too precise. A few days later, Maria was in Sophie's room again, this time reading to her as Richard had requested. He wanted someone to read to Sophie in the afternoons when he was busy with phone calls and business matters. Maria had chosen a novel from the shelf, something about a young girl going on an adventure. As she read, she noticed Sophie's hands resting on a braille book in her lap. But here was the strange thing. Sophie's fingers weren't moving much across the braille dots. Instead, her head was tilted slightly, and she seemed to be following along with Maria's reading perfectly. That would be normal, except Maria noticed that Sophie's fingers would occasionally pause. And in those moments, it looked like the girl was actually reading the printed text on the opposite page of the braille book, where someone had left a regular bookmark with printed words. Maria tested something. She intentionally skipped a paragraph in her reading. Sophie's brow furrowed slightly, and her fingers moved on the braille page as if to check something. Either Sophie had memorized this entire book or she was actually reading it herself somehow. But that would be impossible if she was truly blind, wouldn't it? Maria kept these observations to herself. She didn't want to jump to conclusions or cause trouble. But she couldn't stop noticing things now that she had started paying attention. The real breakthrough came one afternoon when Maria was cleaning. She had been dusting Sophie's room while the girl was downstairs with her father. Maria noticed that some items on Sophie's dresser were getting dusty, so she rearranged them slightly after cleaning. moving a jewelry box a few inches to the left and shifting a photo frame to the right. Nothing major, just small adjustments that would make cleaning easier next time. Later that evening, Maria realized she had left her phone in Sophie's room. She had been listening to messages from her children back home and must have set it down when she started cleaning. She headed back upstairs and approached Sophie's door, which was slightly open. What she saw made her stop in her tracks. Sophie was standing in front of her dresser, and she had done something Maria had never seen her do before. She had taken off her dark glasses. They were sitting on the dresser beside her, and Sophie was looking at herself in the mirror, not just facing the mirror but actually looking, her eyes moving across her own reflection. But that wasn't even the most shocking part. Sophie reached out toward the items on the dresser, and without any hesitation or feeling around, she picked up the jewelry box that Maria had moved earlier. She stared at it for a moment, then moved it back to exactly where it had been before Maria cleaned. Then she did the same with the photo frame, returning it to its original position with perfect accuracy. Maria's breath caught in her throat. She pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding so loudly she was afraid Sophie would hear it. This wasn't possible. Sophie was blind. She had been blind for 5 years. The doctors had said it was permanent. Richard believed it. Everyone believed it. But Maria had just watched Sophie look at herself in the mirror and rearrange objects with visual precision. There was no feeling around, no careful touching, no uncertainty. Just normal movement. The kind of movement that came from being able to see exactly what you were doing. Sophie picked up her glasses and put them back on, her face settling back into that carefully blank expression she always wore. Maria quietly backed away from the door and hurried down the hallway, her mind spinning with 1,000 questions. She spent that night in her small room, unable to sleep. What had she just witnessed? Was Sophie's vision recovering somehow? Had it been recovering slowly and no one noticed? Or was something else going on here? Something much more complicated. Maria thought about Sophie's life over the past weeks. The girl never went anywhere. She had no friends visit. She didn't go to school. She spent all her time with her father or alone in her room. She lived like someone who was completely dependent on others, someone who couldn't function in the world alone. But if Sophie could see, then why was she pretending she couldn't? Why would anyone do that? What possible reason could there be to fake blindness for years, to let your father devote his entire life to taking care of you, to live in this prison of protection and isolation? Maria knew she should tell Richard. This was his daughter, his life. He deserved to know the truth. But something held her back. Maybe it was the look on Sophie's face when she had stared at herself in the mirror. It wasn't a look of deception or manipulation. It was a look of sadness, of someone trapped in a situation they didn't know how to escape from. Maria decided to wait. She needed to understand what was happening before she did anything. She needed to talk to Sophie directly, to hear the girl's side of the story. Because whatever was going on in this house, it was far more complicated than a simple medical miracle. There were secrets here, buried deep under years of guilt and grief and misplaced love. And Maria had a feeling that uncovering those secrets might shatter this family even more than the accident that had started all of this 5 years ago. Maria spent the next 3 days in a state of constant anxiety. Every time she looked at Sophie, she saw the secret hiding behind those dark glasses. Every time Richard spoke about his daughter's blindness with such pain in his voice, Maria felt the weight of knowledge pressing down on her chest. She knew something that would change everything, and she didn't know what to do about it. She tried to convince herself that maybe she had been wrong. Maybe the lighting in the room had played tricks on her eyes. Maybe Sophie had just been lucky with her movements. But deep down, Maria knew what she had seen. Sophie could see. There was no doubt about it anymore. On Thursday afternoon, Maria was bringing fresh towels to Sophie's bathroom when she realized she had left her phone in the bedroom. She had been talking to her daughter back home, and in her hurry to put the towels away, she must have set it down somewhere. She headed back toward Sophie's room, her mind on the conversation with her daughter, who was struggling with math homework. Sophie's door was slightly open, about 4 or 5 inches. Maria was about to knock when something made her pause. Through the gap, she could see part of Sophie's room, including the large window that overlooked the garden. And there, standing at that window, was Sophie. The curtain was pulled back just enough to let in sunlight. Sophie had her back to the door, And most importantly, her dark glasses were sitting on the windowsill beside her. Her face was turned toward the window and she was looking out with such focus and intensity that Maria's breath caught in her throat. Maria stood frozen in the hallway, unable to move. She watched as Sophie's eyes followed something in the garden below. A bird, Maria realized. A bright red cardinal had landed on one of the lower branches of an oak tree. Sophie's eyes tracked the bird's movements perfectly as it hopped from one branch to another, pecking at something in the bark. It wasn't just that Sophie could see the bird. It was the way she was watching it. There was such hunger in her expression, such longing, like someone who had been locked away from the world and was stealing a few precious moments to experience it. Her eyes followed the bird as it took flight, swooping across the garden and landing on the fountain. Sophie's head turned smoothly, tracking the movement with perfect accuracy. Then another bird joined the first one. They splashed in the fountain water together, and Maria saw something she had never seen before on Sophie's face. A smile, a real, genuine smile. Not the polite, empty expression she wore around her father and the staff. This was the smile of a 17-year-old girl who was enjoying a simple, beautiful moment. Maria felt tears prickling her eyes. In that moment, she understood something about Sophie's isolation that she hadn't fully grasped before. This girl wasn't just pretending to be blind. She was living in a cage of her own making, stealing these brief moments of freedom when she thought no one was watching. Sophie reached up and touched the glass of the window, her fingers tracing the outline of one of the birds. She whispered something that Maria couldn't quite hear, but the sadness in her voice was unmistakable. Then, as if sensing that she had been away from her glasses too long, Sophie turned back from the window. Maria quickly and quietly stepped away from the door, her heart pounding. She pressed herself against the wall around the corner, waiting. She heard the soft sound of Sophie's footsteps moving away from the window. A moment later, she heard the girl settle back into her armchair, probably reaching for one of her Braille books to maintain the illusion. Maria waited a full minute before she approached the door again, this time knocking loudly. "Sophie? It's Maria. I think I left my phone in here earlier. Can I come in?" Of course, Sophie's voice came back, carefully neutral. Maria entered the room. Sophie was sitting in her chair, glasses firmly in place, hands on a Braille book. The curtain was closed again. Everything looked exactly as it always did. But Maria knew better now. She knew the truth. She found her phone on the nightstand and picked it up, but instead of leaving right away, she stood there for a moment, looking at Sophie. The girl sat so still, so carefully composed. She looked like a statue, like someone who was afraid that any wrong movement might give her away. "Sophie," Maria said softly, "are you happy?" The question seemed to surprise Sophie. Her hand stilled on the Braille book. "What do you mean?" "I mean, are you happy? Living like this, every day the same, never going anywhere or doing anything. Are you happy?" There was a long pause. Sophie's fingers trembled slightly on the page. "My father takes good care of me," she finally said. "I have everything I need." "That's not what I asked," Maria pressed gently. "I asked if you're happy." Sophie turned her head toward Maria, and even though Maria couldn't see her eyes behind the dark glasses, she could sense the girl's conflict. "Does it matter?" Sophie asked quietly. "This is my life now. This is what it is." Maria wanted to say something, wanted to challenge that resignation, but she held back. Now wasn't the right time, not yet. She needed to think about how to handle this situation carefully. "Well, if you ever want to talk," Maria said. "I'm a good listener, about anything." She left the room, and once she was alone in the hallway, she leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. Her hands were shaking. The implications of what she had discovered were enormous. This wasn't just about a girl who could see. This was about lies that had been going on for years. This was about a father who had restructured his entire life based on a false premise. This was about a family that was drowning in secrets and grief. That night, Maria lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. She thought about her own children, about the sacrifices she had made to give them a better life. She thought about the lies people tell themselves and each other, sometimes out of love, sometimes out of fear. She thought about Richard, who seemed to live every day with crushing guilt, trying to make up for a moment that had destroyed his family. And she thought about Sophie, trapped in darkness that she had created for herself, watching the world through stolen moments at a window, pretending to be helpless while actually being perfectly capable of seeing everything around her. Maria knew she couldn't keep this secret much longer. It was too big, too important. But she also knew that revealing it would change everything. It would shatter Richard's world. It would expose Sophie's deception. It would tear apart the fragile balance this family had created over 5 years. Before Maria did anything, she needed to talk to Sophie directly. She needed to hear the whole story, to understand why a young girl would sacrifice her own life like this, because there had to be a reason. People didn't maintain such an elaborate lie for years without a powerful motivation. Tomorrow, Maria decided. Tomorrow she would find Sophie alone and demand the truth, not for herself but for everyone involved, because keeping this secret was only going to hurt everyone more in the long run. The truth had to come out even if it was painful, even if it destroyed the carefully constructed world that Richard and Sophie had built together. Maria barely slept for the next 3 nights. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Sophie standing at that window, watching the birds with such longing on her face. She saw Richard's worried expression every time he checked on his daughter. She felt the weight of the secret crushing her chest, making it hard to breathe. She knew she had to act, but fear held her back. What if she was wrong? What if there was some medical explanation she didn't understand? What if confronting Sophie made everything worse? But then she would remember what she had seen, and she knew there was no mistake. Sophie could see, and that truth needed to come out. On Sunday afternoon, Maria's opportunity finally came. Richard had a video conference call with some business partners overseas. It was scheduled to last at least 2 hours. Mrs. Chen had the day off and the other staff member had gone to run errands. The house was quiet, and Sophie was alone in the library. Maria found her there, sitting in a leather armchair with a Braille book open in her lap. The room was dim as always, with heavy curtains blocking most of the sunlight. Sophie's fingers moved slowly across the raised dots on the page, but Maria wondered now if she was really reading or just going through the motions. "Sophie," Maria said, her voice gentle but firm. "We need to talk." "About what?" Sophie asked, not looking up from her book. She sounded casual, but Maria could hear the tension underneath. Maria closed the door behind her and walked closer. Her heart was pounding, but she forced herself to stay calm. "About what I saw on Thursday. At your bedroom window." Sophie's hands froze on the page. For several seconds she didn't move at all. She didn't even seem to breathe. The silence in the room was thick and heavy, like the air before a storm. "I don't know what you mean," Sophie finally said, but her voice was shaking now. "Yes, you do," Maria said softly. She pulled up a chair and sat down across from Sophie. "I saw you standing at the window, without your glasses, watching the birds in the garden. I saw your eyes following them, tracking their movements perfectly." "Sophie, I know you can see." Another long silence. Maria watched as Sophie's face went through several expressions: fear, panic, desperation, and finally something like resignation. Slowly, almost mechanically, Sophie closed the Braille book and set it aside. "Please," Sophie whispered. "Please don't tell him." Those 4 words held so much pain that Maria felt her eyes filling with tears. "Sophie, why? Why are you doing this?" Sophie's hands trembled in her lap. She seemed to be struggling with whether to keep denying it or to finally tell someone the truth. Maria waited, giving her time. Finally, Sophie reached up and took off her glasses. When she looked at Maria, her eyes were perfectly clear, focused, and filled with tears. "My vision started coming back about 2 years ago," Sophie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It happened gradually. First, I could just see light and shadows. Then shapes started becoming clearer. Within 6 months, I could see everything perfectly. The doctors had said it was impossible, that the damage was permanent. But somehow it healed." "And you didn't tell your father?" Maria asked gently. Sophie shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I wanted to. God, you don't know how many times I almost did. But I couldn't, I just couldn't. Why not? Sophie, your father has devoted his entire life to taking care of you. Don't you think he deserves to know?" "That's exactly why I can't tell him." Sophie's voice rose with emotion. "Don't you understand? Taking care of me is the only thing keeping him alive." Maria leaned back, confused. "What do you mean?" Sophie wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "Before the accident, my father was never home. He was always working, always traveling, always too busy for me and my mom. I barely knew him. He would miss my birthdays, my school events, everything. My mom used to cry sometimes because he was never there." She took a shaky breath. Then the accident happened. My mom died, and I lost my vision, and suddenly everything changed. My father fell apart completely. I remember lying in the hospital bed and I could hear him in the hallway sobbing. I had never heard him cry before. He kept saying it was his fault, that he had killed my mom and destroyed my life. Maria listened silently, beginning to understand the complexity of the situation. When I came home from the hospital, he was different. Sophie continued. He stopped going to the office. He sold one of his companies because it took too much time. He turned down opportunities that would have made him even richer. For the first time in my life, my father was actually there. He read to me. He talked to me. He held my hand. He became the father I had always wanted. So when your vision came back, Maria said slowly, you were afraid of losing that. It wasn't just about me, Sophie insisted. You should have seen him those first few months after the accident. He was destroyed, completely broken. The only thing that gave him any purpose was taking care of me. It was like as long as he could be my caretaker, he could handle the guilt of what happened. But if I told him I could see again, what would he have left? What purpose would he have? Maria shook her head. Sophie, that's not your responsibility. You're his daughter, not his reason for living. But I am, Sophie said desperately. Don't you see? Taking care of me became his entire identity. He pushed away all his friends. He stopped doing the things he used to enjoy. His whole life revolves around me now. If I tell him the truth after lying for 2 years, he'll hate me. And even if he doesn't, he'll have nothing left. No purpose, no direction, nothing. So instead, you're sacrificing your own life, Maria asked. Sophie, you're 17 years old. What about school? What about friends? What about having a normal teenage life? What about your future? I know, Sophie whispered, fresh tears streaming down her face. I think about it every day. I lie in bed at night and imagine what it would be like to just walk out of this house, to go to a mall, to sit in a coffee shop, to do normal things that normal teenagers do. But then I think about my father and what it would do to him, and I can't. I just can't. Maria reached out and took Sophie's hand. This isn't sustainable, honey. You can't live like this forever. You're going to have to tell him eventually. What happens when you turn 18? 20, 25? Are you going to pretend to be blind for the rest of your life? I don't know, Sophie sobbed. I don't know what to do. I've thought about telling him 1,000 times. I've rehearsed the words in my head. But every time I try, I see his face and I imagine how hurt he'll be and I chicken out. I'm a coward. You're not a coward, Maria said firmly. You're a scared girl who loves her father and doesn't want to hurt him. But Sophie, you're hurting yourself. And in a way, you're hurting him too because he's living a lie without knowing it. Sophie pulled her hand away and put her face in her hands. What am I supposed to do? How do I tell him after 2 years of lying? How do I explain that I've been pretending this whole time? He'll never forgive me. You don't know that, Maria said. Your father loves you. Yes, he'll be shocked and hurt, but maybe he'll also understand. Maybe he'll be relieved. Maybe finding out you can see will actually free him from some of that guilt he's been carrying. Sophie looked up at her with red, swollen eyes. Or maybe it will destroy him completely. Maybe it will break what's left of our family. Maria sat back in her chair, feeling the weight of this impossible situation. She understood Sophie's fear now. This wasn't just about a lie. This was about a family that had been broken by tragedy and had rebuilt itself on a foundation of guilt, grief, and misguided love. Telling the truth might fix some things, but it would definitely break others. What are you going to do? Sophie asked quietly. Are you going to tell him? Maria looked at this young girl who had trapped herself in darkness out of love and fear. She thought about her own children and the complicated ways that love could make people do irrational things. She thought about Richard and his crushing guilt. She thought about how the truth could set people free, but also how it could destroy them. I'm going to give you 1 month, Maria finally said. 1 month to find the courage to tell your father yourself. Because, Sophie, whether you believe it or not, he deserves to know the truth. And so do you. You deserve to live your life, not waste it pretending to be helpless. And if I can't tell him? Sophie asked. Maria met her eyes steadily. Then I will. I'm sorry, Sophie, but I can't keep this secret forever. It's too big and it's destroying both of you in different ways. 1 month? That's all I can give you. Sophie nodded slowly, looking more frightened than relieved. She put her glasses back on, hiding her eyes once again. Thank you, she whispered. For giving me time, and for not hating me. I don't hate you, Maria said gently. I feel sorry for you. Both of you. This whole situation is heartbreaking." As Maria left the library, she wondered if she had done the right thing. 1 month seemed like both too much time and not enough. But she knew one thing for certain: the truth was going to come out eventually, one way or another. And when it did, everything in the Hartwell house was going to change forever. After their conversation in the library, Sophie couldn't keep everything bottled up anymore. Over the next few days, whenever she and Maria were alone, Sophie would talk. It was like a dam had broken, and all the words she had been holding back for 2 years came flooding out. Maria listened, her heart breaking for this girl who had been carrying such a heavy burden alone. They sat together in Sophie's room one afternoon while Richard was on a business call. Sophie had taken off her glasses, something she only did now when she was with Maria. Her eyes, no longer hidden, showed the constant struggle she was living with. "I remember the exact day my vision started coming back," Sophie said quietly, staring at her hands. "It was a Tuesday about 2 years ago. I woke up and saw light for the first time in 3 years. Not just a vague sense of brightness, but actual light coming through the curtains. I was so happy I almost screamed. I almost ran to my father's room to tell him." "What stopped you?" Maria asked. "I don't know exactly. Maybe it was fear that it wouldn't last. Maybe some part of me already knew what telling him would mean, so I waited. I told myself I would see if the vision stayed, if it got better. Every day I could see a little more clearly. Within a week I could see everything perfectly, like I had never been blind at all." Sophie stood up and walked to her window, pulling back the curtain slightly to look outside. "By then I had been watching my father for a week, really watching him for the first time in years. And I realized something that terrified me. He was happy. For the first time since my mom died, he actually seemed to have a purpose. He would wake up early, smiling, because he was going to help me with my morning routine. He would spend hours reading to me, and I could see on his face that those were the best parts of his day." "So you decided not to tell him," Maria said. "I decided to wait a little longer," Sophie corrected. "I kept telling myself I would tell him next week, next month. But the longer I waited, the harder it became. And I started noticing other things too. How he had changed his entire life for me. How he had sold his favorite company, the one he had built from nothing because running it took too much time away from me." She turned back to Maria, her eyes glistening with tears. "Do you know what he told me once? He said that taking care of me was the only good thing he had done in years. He said that being my father, really being my father instead of just a name on my birth certificate, was his second chance. How could I take that away from him?" Maria moved to stand beside Sophie at the window. "But honey, you're not responsible for your father's happiness. That's not how it should work." "I know that in my head," Sophie said. "But in my heart I couldn't do it. Before the accident, my father barely knew me. He would forget my age sometimes. He missed my 12th birthday because of a business meeting. My mom used to joke that I should schedule an appointment if I wanted to see him. But after the accident, everything changed. Suddenly I was the most important thing in his world." She wiped a tear from her cheek. "For the first time in my life, I had a real father. He knew everything about me, my favorite foods, my favorite books, what made me laugh. We would spend hours together just talking. He would tell me stories about when he was young, about how he met my mom, about things he had never shared before. I got to know him, the real him, not just the busy businessman who was never home." "So you stayed blind to keep him close," Maria said softly. "I stayed blind because I was afraid," Sophie admitted. "Afraid of losing him again. Afraid that if he didn't need to take care of me anymore, he would go back to being that distant workaholic father who didn't have time for me. Afraid that without the guilt driving him, he wouldn't want to spend time with me at all." Maria put her arm around Sophie's shoulders. "That's a terrible fear to carry." "It gets worse," Sophie continued. "As time went on, I realized I wasn't just lying to keep him close. I was lying because I didn't know how to tell the truth anymore. How do you tell someone you've been deceiving them for months? Then those months became a year, and that year became 2 years. Every day that passed made it harder to come clean." She walked back to her chair and sat down heavily. "I started hating myself. Every morning I would put on these glasses and think, today's the day I'll tell him. Today I'll end this lie. But then he would come in with breakfast and smile at me with so much love, and I would think, how can I destroy that? How can I tell him that everything he's been doing for 2 years is based on a lie?" "What about your life?" Maria asked. "What about what you want?" Sophie laughed bitterly. What I want? I don't even know anymore. I'm 17 and I've spent the past 5 years in this house. I don't have friends. I've never been to a high school. I've never been on a date or to a party. My father hired tutors to homeschool me, and I had to pretend to use Braille materials even though I could read regular textbooks perfectly fine. She pulled her knees up to her chest, looking suddenly very young. Sometimes I lie in bed at night and imagine what it would be like to just be normal. To wake up, get dressed, and go outside without anyone holding my hand. To go to a movie theater or a park. To make friends who don't know I'm supposed to be blind. But then morning comes and I put on these glasses and I go back to pretending. You're punishing yourself, Maria observed. You're living in a prison of your own making. Maybe I deserve it, Sophie said quietly. Maybe this is my punishment for lying. For being selfish enough to want my father's attention so badly that I'd fake blindness to keep it. That's not selfish, Maria insisted. You were a child who lost her mother and wanted her father's love. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is that this situation has gone on too long and now it's hurting everyone. Sophie nodded slowly. I know, trust me, I know. Every day I see the way my father worries about me. He's constantly afraid that I'll hurt myself, that something will happen to me. He checks on me multiple times a day. He barely sleeps because he's so worried. And I'm the cause of all that anxiety because I'm lying to him every single day. Has it occurred to you, Maria asked gently, that telling him the truth might actually make him happy? That knowing you can see might lift some of that guilt he's been carrying? I've thought about that, Sophie admitted. But I've also thought about the alternative. What if telling him breaks him completely? What if he can't handle the fact that I've been lying for 2 years? What if he feels so betrayed that he can't forgive me? Right now we have a relationship. Even if it's based on a lie, at least we have something. If I tell him the truth, I might lose him completely. Maria sat down across from Sophie again. You know what I think? I think you're so afraid of losing your father that you've already lost yourself. The real Sophie. The girl who should be living her life, making mistakes, having adventures, she's trapped behind those dark glasses. And every day you keep up this lie, she disappears a little more. Sophie was crying now, silent tears running down her face. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to make it right without destroying everything. The truth is never easy, Maria said, but it's necessary. Your father is a grown man. He's strong enough to handle the truth even if it hurts. What he's not strong enough to handle is living a lie forever, even if he doesn't know it's a lie yet. What if you're wrong? Sophie whispered. What if telling him ruins everything? What if I'm right? Maria countered. What if telling him is the first step toward both of you actually healing from your grief instead of hiding from it? Sophie put her glasses back on, a gesture that Maria now recognized as her way of hiding from difficult emotions. I have less than a month now to figure out how to tell him. That's not much time. It's enough time if you use it, Maria said. Start small. Maybe begin by spending time with him without the pretense. Really talk to him about anything. Remember what it's like to just be father and daughter, not caretaker and patient. Then when you're ready, tell him the truth. I'll be here to support you, whatever happens. Sophie nodded, looking exhausted and scared. Thank you, Maria, for listening, for understanding, for not judging me too harshly. I don't judge you at all, Maria said honestly. I just want both of you to be free from this burden. Because right now you're both prisoners in this beautiful house, trapped by guilt and fear and lies. And life is too short to live like that. As Maria left Sophie's room that day, she prayed that the girl would find the courage to do the right thing. But she also worried. Because sometimes love and fear were so tangled together that it was impossible to separate them. And sometimes the truth that would set you free was also the truth that would break your heart. The days crept by slowly, and Maria found herself caught in an impossible situation. Every morning she watched Richard fuss over Sophie at breakfast, cutting her food into small pieces, describing exactly where everything was on her plate. Every evening she saw him reading to Sophie in the library, his voice gentle and patient. And through it all she knew the truth that he didn't, the secret that was eating away at everyone involved. 2 weeks had passed since Maria's confrontation with Sophie. The girl had tried several times to tell her father the truth Maria knew, because Sophie would confide in her afterward. Each attempt had ended the same way, with Sophie losing her courage at the last moment. I almost told him yesterday, Sophie said one afternoon, her voice filled with frustration and shame. We were sitting in the garden, And he was describing the sunset to me, painting this beautiful picture with words. And all I could think was that I could see it perfectly, that I didn't need his description. I opened my mouth to tell him, but then he said something about how grateful he was that he could be my eyes, and I just couldn't do it. Maria understood the girl's fear, but she was also beginning to feel the strain of keeping the secret. It weighed on her conscience, making her feel complicit in the deception. She had her own family to think about, her own children who depended on her income. If she told Richard without Sophie's consent and things went badly, she could lose her job. But if she stayed silent, she was allowing a lie to continue that was hurting everyone involved. She found herself praying more than usual, lying awake at night and asking for guidance. What was the right thing to do? Respect Sophie's request for time and hope the girl found courage? Or tell Richard immediately, despite the potential consequences? Maria thought about her own relationship with her children back home. She had left them to work abroad to give them a better life. She called them every week, sent them money, and told herself it was the right decision. But was it? Or was she justifying her absence the same way Sophie was justifying her lies? Were they both hiding from uncomfortable truths? One evening, Richard found Maria in the kitchen after dinner. The other staff had gone home and Sophie was in her room. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, looking more relaxed than usual. "Maria, I wanted to thank you," he said, "for the way you've been with Sophie. She seems different lately, happier somehow, more engaged. I don't know what you're doing, but please keep doing it." Maria's stomach clenched with guilt. "I'm just spending time with her, sir. Talking to her. Well, whatever it is, it's working. You know, sometimes I worry that Sophie has given up on life, that she's just going through the motions, existing but not really living. But lately I've seen glimpses of the girl she used to be before the accident, more animated, more present." He smiled sadly. I'd forgotten what that looked like. Maria felt like she was going to be sick. Here was Richard, grateful for changes in his daughter that were happening because Sophie was finally talking to someone about her deception. And he had no idea. "Mr. Hartwell," Maria said carefully, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever think about what would happen if Sophie's vision came back? If there was a miracle or something?" Richard's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "The doctors were very clear that her condition is permanent. The optic nerves were too damaged. I know, but hypothetically, if it did happen, would you be happy?" Richard was quiet for a long moment, staring into his glass of water. "Of course I would be happy," he finally said. "What kind of father wouldn't want his daughter to see again?" He paused. "But honestly, Maria, I try not to think about it. False hope is cruel. I've accepted Sophie's blindness, and I've built my life around helping her cope with it. That's my purpose now. Imagining something different would just make this harder." Those words stayed with Maria long after Richard went to bed. His purpose was taking care of blind Sophie. What would happen to that purpose if Sophie wasn't blind anymore? Sophie's fears suddenly seemed more justified than ever. The next day, Maria called her own daughter in the Philippines. She needed to hear a familiar voice to connect with something real and true in her life. "Mama, when are you coming home?" her 10-year-old asked. "I miss you. Soon, baby. Mama just needs to work a little longer. That's what you always say. Are you ever really coming home?" The question hit Maria like a punch to the chest. Her daughter's voice held no anger, just resigned sadness. How long had she been saying soon without actually meaning it? How long had she been using money and gifts as a substitute for her actual presence? After the call ended, Maria sat in her small room and cried. She was thousands of miles away from her children, judging Sophie for lying to her father, when she herself was lying about when she'd return home. They were both doing the same thing, sacrificing honesty for what they believed was a greater good. But was it really for the greater good? Or were they both just afraid of facing difficult truths? That evening, Maria made a decision. She went to Sophie's room and found the girl sitting by the window, her usual spot now that she felt safe taking off her glasses around Maria. "I've been thinking," Maria said, "and I realize I've been unfair to you." Sophie looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "I gave you an ultimatum, a deadline. But the truth is, I don't have the right to force you to tell your father. This is your life, your decision. Yes, I think you should tell him. Yes, I think keeping this secret is hurting both of you. But ultimately, it's not my place to decide when or how that happens." "So you're not going to tell him?" Sophie asked, hope and confusion mixing in her voice. "I'm saying that I'm going to leave that choice up to you." "But Sophie..." I want you to really think about something. Every day that you keep lying, you're not just hiding your vision, you're hiding yourself, the real you. And every day that your father spends taking care of a daughter who doesn't need that care, he's missing the chance to know the real you too. You're both losing time that you can never get back. Sophie was quiet, absorbing Maria's words. I'm leaving at the end of this month, Maria continued, making the decision as she spoke. I need to go home to my own children. They need me, and I've been using work as an excuse to avoid my own difficult truths. Before I go, I'm giving you one last chance to make things right. Not because I'm forcing you, but because I believe it's what's best for you and your father. You're leaving? Sophie looked genuinely distressed. But you're the only person I can talk to, the only one who knows the truth. Which is exactly why you need to tell your father, Maria said gently. You can't rely on me to be your secret keeper. At some point, you have to be brave enough to face this yourself. Over the next week, Maria watched Sophie struggle with the decision. The girl would start conversations with Richard that seemed to be leading somewhere, only to veer away at the last moment. Maria could see the internal war happening inside her, the battle between fear and courage, between the comfortable lie and the terrifying truth. Meanwhile, Maria made arrangements to return home. She told Mrs. Chen she had family obligations. She booked her flight. She packed her belongings. And she prayed that somehow before she left, the truth would come out in a way that didn't destroy this already fragile family. 3 days before Maria's scheduled departure, something shifted. Sophie came to find her in the kitchen, her face pale but determined. I'm going to tell him tonight, Sophie said, after dinner. I can't keep doing this. You're right. We're both losing time we can never get back. Whatever happens, at least it will be real. Maria hugged her tightly. I'm proud of you. And no matter what happens, remember that you did this out of love. Your father will understand that eventually. But that evening, something happened that would force the truth out in a way none of them could have anticipated. Sometimes the universe has its own timeline, one that doesn't wait for people to be ready. And sometimes the secrets we try so hard to control end up revealing themselves in the most unexpected ways. The day started normally enough. Richard had a business meeting scheduled in the city, something unusual for him as he typically conducted all his business from home. But this particular deal required his physical presence, and Sophie had insisted he go, telling him she would be fine with Maria there. Richard left around 10 in the morning, promising to be back by 4. Sophie seemed nervous all day, and Maria knew why. Tonight was the night. Sophie had made her decision. After dinner, she would sit her father down and tell him everything. I have it all planned out, Sophie told Maria as they sat in the library. For once, her glasses were off and she was looking directly at Maria. I'm going to tell him that I love him, that everything I did was because I was afraid of losing him. Then I'm going to explain how my vision came back and why I was too scared to say anything. And then I'm going to apologize and hope that he can forgive me. He will, Maria said, though she wasn't entirely sure. It might take time, but he will. Sophie nodded, but her hands were shaking. I'm terrified, but I'm also relieved. I'm so tired of lying, Maria. So tired of pretending. I just want to be myself again, even if it means losing everything. You won't lose everything, Maria assured her. You might lose some things and it might be painful, but you'll gain something more important. The truth. And a real relationship with your father, based on honesty instead of guilt. They talked for a while longer, and then Sophie said she wanted to take a bath and get ready for the conversation ahead. Maria went downstairs to help Mrs. Chen prepare dinner. Tonight's meal needed to be special. Sophie had requested all of Richard's favorite foods. Around 2 in the afternoon, Richard called. The meeting had ended earlier than expected, and he was on his way home. He sounded happy, energized in a way Maria rarely heard. Apparently, the business deal had gone well, and he was looking forward to telling Sophie about it. Maria went upstairs to tell Sophie that her father would be home early, but when she knocked on the door, there was no answer. She could hear water running in the bathroom, so she assumed Sophie was still in the bath. She decided to wait downstairs and tell her when she came down. 15 minutes later, Richard arrived home. He came in through the front door, calling out cheerfully, Sophie, where's my girl? I have good news. Maria came out of the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. Welcome back, Mr. Hartwell. Sophie is upstairs. She was taking a bath, but she should be done by now. Richard smiled and headed toward the library, his usual meeting spot with Sophie. I'll wait for her there. The meeting went better than I expected. I think Sophie will be proud of how I handled it. Maria returned to the kitchen, but something felt off. She couldn't explain it, just a nagging feeling in her gut. After a few minutes, she decided to check on Sophie again. She climbed the stairs and knocked on Sophie's bedroom door. Still no answer. The water in the bathroom had stopped running, but the house felt too quiet. "Sophie?" Maria called out, opening the door. The bedroom was empty. She walked toward the bathroom and knocked. "Sophie, honey? Are you okay?" Nothing. Maria's heart started racing. She opened the bathroom door slowly, preparing to apologize for the intrusion. But what she saw made her gasp. Sophie wasn't there. The bathtub was full, but there was no Sophie. The window in the bathroom was open, curtains blowing in the breeze. For a moment, Maria's mind went to the worst possible places. But then she noticed Sophie's dark glasses sitting on the counter. No blind person would leave their glasses behind. Maria rushed to the window and looked out. It wasn't a high window, it led to a lower roof section that connected to a tree. Someone could climb down if they knew what they were doing. If they could see what they were doing. Maria's heart sank. Sophie had run away. The pressure of the impending confession, the years of lies, the fear of her father's reaction, it had all become too much. She had run. Maria raced downstairs, trying to decide what to do. Should she tell Richard? Should she go look for Sophie herself? But before she could make a decision, she heard Richard's voice from the library, and it wasn't alone. He was talking to someone. Maria walked quickly toward the library and stopped in the doorway. What she saw made her freeze. Richard was standing in the middle of the room, and Sophie was there too. But Sophie wasn't sitting in her usual chair with her cane nearby. She was standing at the window, and she had pulled back the curtains, letting bright afternoon sunlight flood into the room. She was holding a regular book, not a braille book, just a normal book with regular printed text, and she was reading it. Her face was turned toward the pages, her eyes clearly tracking the words. She was so absorbed in what she was reading that she hadn't heard her father come in. Richard stood there, completely still, his face showing a progression of emotions that Maria could see even from the doorway. Confusion, disbelief, understanding, shock, betrayal. "Sophie?" His voice came out strangled, confused, like he wasn't sure what he was seeing was real. Sophie spun around and the book fell from her hands, hitting the floor with a loud thud. Her face went completely white. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For several long seconds, father and daughter just stared at each other across the room. "You can see," Richard whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, an acknowledgement of something so obvious now that he was looking at it without the veil of his assumptions. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. She reached up as if to grab for her glasses, but of course they weren't there. She had left them upstairs. There was no way to hide now, no way to pretend. The truth was standing in the bright sunlight, exposed and undeniable. "Dad, Sophie started, but her voice broke. "How long?" Richard asked. His voice was getting louder now, harder. "How long have you been able to see?" Sophie flinched at his tone. Tears were streaming down her face. "Dad, please, I can explain. How long?" Richard demanded, and now he was almost shouting. Maria had never heard him raise his voice before. 2 years, Sophie choked out. "My vision came back 2 years ago." The words hung in the air like a bomb. Richard staggered backward as if she had physically struck him. His face went through several emotions at once: hurt, betrayal, confusion, anger. He put his hand against the wall to steady himself. 2 years, he repeated, his voice hollow. "You've been lying to me for 2 years. I wasn't trying to hurt you," Sophie sobbed. "I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" Richard's voice rose again. "By lying to me every single day? By letting me believe my daughter was blind when she wasn't? By making me live with that guilt, that responsibility, when it wasn't even necessary?" "The guilt was eating you alive," Sophie cried out. "Before the accident, you were never home. You barely knew me. But after, when you thought I was blind, you became a real father for the first time. I saw how taking care of me gave you purpose, made you happy. How could I take that away from you?" Richard was shaking his head, backing away from her. No, you don't get to put this on me. You don't get to say you lied for my sake. What kind of father was I that my daughter felt she had to stay blind to keep me around?" He turned and walked toward the door, but Sophie ran after him, grabbing his arm. "Dad, please, don't go. Let me explain everything." Richard pulled his arm away, not roughly but firmly. His face was wet with tears now. I need to think. I need to process this. I can't look at you right now. He walked past Maria without even seeing her and headed toward his study. Sophie started to follow, but Maria gently caught her arm. Give him time, Maria said softly. Sophie collapsed right there in the hallway, sliding down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Maria sat down beside her, holding the girl while she cried. Mrs. Chen appeared, looking confused and concerned, but Maria waved her away. This was a family matter, and there were no quick fixes for this kind of pain. For the next several hours, the house was split in two. Richard locked himself in his study, refusing to come out. Sophie cried in her room, devastated by her father's reaction even though she had expected it. Maria stayed close to Sophie, making sure the girl didn't do anything rash in her emotional state. As evening approached, Maria knew she had to do something. This family was tearing itself apart, and someone needed to help them start putting the pieces back together. She made a pot of tea, put some cookies on a plate, and knocked on Richard's study door. Mr. Hartwell? It's Maria, can I come in? There was a long pause, then a quiet, yes. Maria opened the door and found Richard sitting at his desk, his head in his hands. He looked like he had aged 10 years in a few hours. The tea and cookies sat untouched as Maria pulled up a chair. I know, she said simply. Richard looked up at her, his eyes red. You know, I've known for about 3 weeks. Sophie and I have been talking. She was planning to tell you tonight, actually, after dinner. She had it all planned out. Richard let out a bitter laugh. Well, I ruined that plan by coming home early. Mr. Hartwell, I know you're hurt and angry. You have every right to be. What Sophie did was wrong. But I need you to hear her side of the story. Really hear it before you make any decisions about what happens next. What could she possibly say that would make this okay? Richard asked, his voice breaking. She lied to me for 2 years. Every day I worried about her, adjusted my life for her.